Mick Mulvaney, I love the idea that they brought him on St. Patrick's Day. I think that's pretty good. But I also...
Insult to the Irish people.
Mick Mulvaney did not bring his... Well, he may have brought his A game, but he did not bring a game to face the nation. This is pretty stunning how how he is defending the President of the United States from being an influence on white nationalism across the globe. When the killer in New Zealand specifically cited, I am sane enough to realize that Trump is a buffoon, but I also appreciate the work he's doing for white nationalism. That's essentially what he said. And here's Mick Mulvaney trying to make the argument that it's so unfair. Like even the numbers, even this keeping tallies of things is a problem.
Referring to what happened here. Broadly speaking, a number of attacks and support for white supremacy is up, according to the Southern Poverty Law Center. And even a Trump-appointed attorney in the state of Virginia, Thomas Cullen, was recently quoted as saying, white supremacy and far-right extremism are among the greatest domestic security threats facing the United States. Has the president been briefed on this?
I don't know who that gentleman is. Certainly the president's briefed on all of...
You know who the Southern Poverty Law Center is?
I do. The president's absolutely briefed on all of the threats, both domestic and international. But I want to push back against this idea that every time something bad happens everywhere around the world, folks who don't like Donald Trump seem to blame it on Donald Trump. I'm hoping we can get...
I'm not blaming it on the president. I was asking about his characterization.
I didn't say you. I'm saying that that's clearly what some folks want to do. I've heard other members of the Democrat Party trying to do it, folks at the Southern Poverty Law Center here trying to do it. This is a tragic thing that happened in New Zealand.
They're just saying the number of white nationalist groups has surged by 50%.
Since Trump has become office, right?
Well, in the past year.
There you go. Here's the point.
Well, excuse me. Well, there you go. You're just deciding normal time frames, like the past year.
Statistic
or
that
the
happens.
Past 2 years.
Oh, well, there you go. It happened at the same time.
But, I mean, what if you were to look at, for instance, has the number of white nationalist groups gone up over the course of like 200 years? How could you possibly blame that on Trump? You couldn't, right? So let's look at that. That's basically his argument here.
Let's be a little fair here.
That's his argument basically is at this point, like, it is unfair to use the period of time that Donald Trump has been in office or any part of that time he's in office to make that measurement is what his argument is. Go back. It's sort of astonishing. Like, oh, there you go. 1 year, of course. Going back a year. Well, have you gone back?
You're blaming me for a deficit number. How about you start before I became president? Come on. What about be a little fair, Mick?
But the increase in the deficit is what would be the analogy. Like,
that's what I'm
there
saying.
is nothing.
That's what I'm saying.
There is no. This is just bizarre.
That's clearly what some folks want to do. I've heard other members of the Democrat Party trying to do it, folks at the Southern Poverty Law Center here trying to do it. This is a tragic thing that happened in New Zealand.
They're just saying the number of white nationalist groups has surged by 50%.
Since Trump has become office, right?
Well, in the past year.
There you go. So here's the point. Why
do
can't
you disagree that it's a rising threat?
I disagree that there's a causal link between Donald Trump being president and something like this happening in New Zealand.
But that's not the argument. Or the suggestion there, by the judge or by that statistic. Is the president aware that this is a rising threat?
Again, a rising threat. I think the president, you saw him asked the other day, does he think it's a rising threat? And he says, no, I think there's information that would back that up. The issue is, how do you stop these crazy people, whether or not there's one of them or
so pause it. So let
them.
me be clear. First, he says it's unfair to blame this rising threat on Donald Trump. And then he says, and of course, there is no rising threat. As the president has said, there's no rising threat. So it's not just that it's unfair to blame the president on this rising threat. It's that there is no rising threat. And on top of that, it's just not. You're saying there's a causal connection between the rising threat and the presidency, and I'm saying that's not a causal connection. And as for the next question, I'm going to say it doesn't exist anyways.
issue is, how do you stop these crazy people? Whether or not there's one of them or four of them doesn't make a difference if they're willing to go on live TV and stream the murder of people. So I think that's where the time is better spent. Instead of worrying about, well, who's to blame, how do we stop from doing this? Donald Trump is no more to blame for what happened in New Zealand than Mark Zuckerberg is, because he invented Facebook. There are some terrible people in the world. We need to work with our partners, of which New Zealand is one of them, to try and figure a way to find them, expose them, and bring them to justice.
Well, President Trump.
I'll also say that there is a decent argument out there that Facebook is adding to, and these type of social media platforms is adding to the virulence and the spread of this ideology, and that they have some type of responsibility to sit on it. In fact, I mean, there's a reason why Gab, is that what it is, exists, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Because a lot of these white nationalists have been kicked off of Twitter. So that didn't work out so well for Mick Mulvaney.
Yeah, we're fine with blaming Facebook.
Work with our partners, of which New Zealand is one of them, to try and figure a way to find them, expose them, and bring them to justice.
Well, President Trump, and certainly during the campaign, talked quite a lot about the need to be specific, to name a threat in order to counter it. So why minimize it? Why not directly address white supremacy and specifically Islamophobia?
Yeah, I get a lot of
Because a
questions
number
about...
of world leaders did, and the president didn't.
I get a lot of questions from people saying, well, you need to tell the president to do X. You need to tell the president to go and give an Oval Office address on this or on that. That's not how the system works. The president communicates in his way. Different presidents
I believe that.
communicated in their way. I don't think anybody can claim that Donald Trump hasn't done exactly what we would want him to do in this circumstance. We've immediately reached out to our allies. We've expressed the absolute disgust at the tragic events. We're doing what presidents are supposed to do. That doesn't mean that it's going to make everybody happy because of the hyper-partisan times we live in. But again, I really, it frustrates me just as a citizen.
Oh, I don't even want to hear this anymore. Honestly, he moved, and you know, I don't. Maybe what Margaret Brennan is hearing is different from what I'm hearing. But he just said, "Oh, I'm not responsible. I've been here as a spokesperson for the president until this moment, where you ask me why he's the only one who's not talking about white nationalism. That's not the process of what the presidency is. I'm not the president. I'm just the acting second acting chief of staff, or whatever it is, my title this week. I'm just the guy who's in the office who's not his son-in-law. So I'm not going to take any responsibility for that, but I can tell you these suggestions of causal connections and the idea that there's anything to be causal connected by is also ridiculous. I mean, this is like a parody. I don't know why they bring that guy back on.
No, he's running out the clock in a calm tone, saying basically nothing. That's his job. And they don't even have to make all of their excuses make sense put together, because they have the power.
Yeah, I like the tone bluffing, which is like, I'm going to ask for a clarification on that number you gave, and then act like it absolves Trump of everything, even though it's just like, oh, what time frame do you got there? That's right. That's expert level, I think.
Yeah, no, you're both right here. And really, on some level, it's like they got to pick up the game a little bit on Face the Nation or wherever it is. You got to just you almost get meta as to what is going on. Like, wait a second. First, you argue there's no causal connection. Then you argue that there is no rising threat. Which is it? Is there no rising threat, or is there no causal connection? Because you can't make the case there's no causal connection to something that doesn't exist. You wouldn't have to make that argument because it doesn't exist.
I also don't particularly care for I get what she's doing with the president said you need to be really specific about Muslim terrorism, but I
totally meant that.
Yeah, specific. I
mean,
mean, that's
not just
actually
to attack
really
Obama.
Right, and that's actually kind of the point, right? Neither of those things are specific. With Muslims, they universalize an entire group of people in an act of bigotry, discrimination, and bans, and then when it's white nationalist terrorism, it's non-specific to the point of totally opaque.
Doesn't matter. If it's
Whereas
1,
there's
4,
actually,
6.
there's a happy middle here where we could say, Al-Qaeda did that. A white nationalist terrorist did that. It's really actually not that hard. And in neither case are you being specific. It's just one, you're obscuring and distracting, and the other, you're doing bigotry.